Balance. Would you say that your life is balanced? I hear that. What would it mean to live a balanced life? Scary, huh? In some ways, yes. It seems to me as though Luke is trying to give us a clue. Luke is a great writer. It's so interesting to watch not only the Jesus stories he chooses to tell, but how he tells them and how he arranges them. For example, in last week's lectionary, Luke told us the story of the Good Samaritan. If you were here, you heard that story. A man is on the road between Jericho and Jerusalem and is beaten by thieves and left for dead. A priest and a Levite on their way to Jerusalem both pass him by, and then along comes a Samaritan who stops and not only helps the man, but also takes him to an inn and pays for his care. The punchline seems to be, go and do the same. Remember, the original question was, "Teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" And the answer was, do that. Be a good neighbor. And who is my neighbor? Anyone. Anyone who needs my help. Perhaps mostly those who are looked down upon and despised by others. Go and do that, Jesus says to all of us. My friends, there are a lot of people who need help. You could spend all day, every day, and it could become overwhelming. Jesus knew that, and Luke knew it too. And so here, right after the story of the Good Samaritan, he puts this story. The Good Samaritan teaches us to do the neighborly thing. And this story about Mary and Martha seems to be saying, you know what? You need time to not do things as well. That's part of the balance of things. Balance between being and doing. Between doing things for other people, for yourself, and time with God. I know those lines can be very blurry. But if you took a typical week, and wrote down everything you did in that week, with times marked beside it, how would it stack up, do you think? Is there a good balance of time and good works, and time for you, and time sitting at the feet of Jesus? As I was writing this, I thought maybe that's not fair either. Maybe it should be balanced over a lifetime, because there are seasons in our lives when we don't have so much control over what we're doing. We don't have a choice about the times we select to do things. And there are times when we have more energy and times when we have less energy, and so on. But for now, what does the balance look like to you as you think about putting that down? And if you feel like there's an imbalance, what is it that you need? Is it more time alone, more time in prayer, or more time spent doing things for others besides yourself or your own family? That's a big part of what this story is inviting us to, so let's get ready to take a look at it. In August of 2014, when I was district superintendent, the Northern Maine District held a retreat in Calais, Maine. It was called For the Common Good. Our facilitator was Rebecca Simon Peter. She's known for teaching leaders how to bring out the best in the people who frustrate them the most. Rebecca is the developer of highly effective programs which help clergy and lay people across the country to revitalize their congregations. She's also an accomplished author. Her books include The Jew Named Jesus, Discover the Man and His Message, and also one on a totally different perspective, Green Church, Reduce, Reuse, Recycle, Rejoice. She's quite a person. One of the most helpful pieces of the retreat was the use of the DISC personality profile to help church leaders look first at their own primary mode of functioning, and then at how differing personality types lead to differing expectations, which can lead to different approaches to the work of the church, which can sometimes lead to significant conflict in a church. The reality, brothers and sisters, is that we are different. And when we recognize and understand that, when we respect and celebrate our differences, we get along much better. This idea is deeply rooted in the Bible. In Paul's letter to the church of Corinth, he reminds the church that some are prophets and some are teachers. Some are action-oriented, while others are pensive and thoughtful. Some are poetic and some are autocratic. Some are loud and some are quiet. We are different people. We have different personalities and different styles and different temperaments. And that is okay. It's not only okay, it's necessary in order for the church and in order for a society to be fully functional, as long as we are loving and tolerant about that. Now, with this as a backdrop for our thinking, let's turn to this, one of my favorite Bible stories, where Luke comes to visit in the home of Mary and Martha. Mary and Martha are the best-known sisters in the entire Bible. At least that's my opinion. Jesus appears to have known them very well. Here was a family, these two bachelor maids and their bachelor brother Lazarus. It's a family with whom Jesus felt at home. Here was a place where he could kick off his sandals. He could speak his mind. He could let down his hair. Obviously loved them. We know that from the other story of this family, from the death of Lazarus. He cared deeply about this family. Remember this story with me for a moment. James W. Moore tells it this way. All morning long there had been a bustle of excitement in the home in Bethany. Jesus was coming for dinner. Martha was so excited. Since daybreak, Martha has been sweeping, scrubbing, dusting, checking recipes, darting in and out of the kitchen, frantically preparing the food and putting the place in order for this special occasion. Every moment now is precious. So much to do, so many details to take care of. And then Jesus arrives. And look what happens. Mary whisks in and takes over as hostess. She welcomes Jesus and the disciples warmly and ushers them into the living room. There's a certain urgency about the moment for Jesus. The Master is on his way to Jerusalem and ultimately to the cross. He begins to talk to his friends. He has so much to tell them, so much to teach them, and so little time. They listen attentively, especially Mary. Mary has positioned herself at the feet of Jesus, and she is drinking in his every word. How good to have him here. How good to hear him again. How good it is just to be in his presence. Meanwhile, Martha is out in the kitchen, slaving away, preparing the meal, polishing the silverware, cutting up the fruits and vegetables, checking all the last-minute details, doing the 101 things that her super-efficient mind knows need to be done. But here's the problem. All the while that Martha is working feverishly, she is seething inside. Her resentment mounts. She gets more and more aggravated, more and more frustrated. She feels more and more put upon, more and more stressed out. Where is Mary? Why isn't she in here helping me? Who does she think she is? Who is she sitting in there with our guests and leaving all the dirty work to me? Surely Jesus can see the injustice of this situation. Ever been there? Can you see Martha's face? Her hair matted around her sweating brow, her lips a tight white line as anger and resentment build up. Out in the kitchen, Martha is wretched. And it's not because she's not a good cook. It's not even really because she has too much to do by herself. She keeps looking over her shoulder. She keeps wishing she were a bit more like Mary. She compares herself with Mary. She calculates her gifts and her service and her way of life and what she perceives to be Jesus' lack of attention to it. More than getting Mary's help, she wants Jesus' appreciation for all she is doing, for her much serving. Finally, she's unable to contain herself any longer, and her resentment erupts. She bursts out of the kitchen into the living room and she makes a scene. Have you ever been part of a scene? On any end of it? Martha makes one. She blurts out, "Lord, don't you notice that I'm having to do all the work by myself here? Don't you care that my sister has left me to do this preparation all by myself? Tell her to get out here in the kitchen and help me." Notice who she goes to. If she were upset just with Mary, the best thing would have been for her to go directly to Mary and to tell her what she wanted and what she needed. Jesus himself says, as recorded in Matthew 18:15-17, that when you have an issue with someone, you should first go directly to them and only involve someone else if you can't settle it directly. But Martha goes to Jesus because Martha is upset not only with Mary, but also with Jesus for not paying attention to her, for not focusing on her hard work. Suddenly, her hospitality breaks down. She has been so focused on preparing her home and her meal for her guests, and now she bursts out of the kitchen and loudly chastises her special guest in front of all those who have gathered here in her home to hear him speak. The child in her who craves attention does what so many children do and acts out in order to receive attention. I'm sure you've heard the saying that even negative attention is better than none. That's where Martha was. Don't for a minute imagine that Jesus was not appreciative of Martha's intense desire for a job well done. It's not that at all. But you see, Jesus was not concerned about what Martha was doing outwardly, but rather about what she was feeling inwardly. His concern was for Martha herself. He was concerned about her attitudes. In a moment, with a brief glance, he can see right down into the inner recesses of a person's soul. When Jesus looked at his dear friend Martha that day, in that emotional moment, he saw some red flags, some destructive attitudes within her which were more harmful to Martha herself than to anyone else. So the response of Jesus to Martha's plea is not a criticism of her work. It's not a criticism of her love for him. Rather, it's a response to her anxiety and her anger. Jesus merely states the facts. "Martha, Martha," said with love. "Martha, Martha, you are anxious and troubled about many things." That's pretty obvious at this point. Put your name in there. Jesus talks to us all. Pat, Pat, you are anxious and troubled about many things. Now say it for yourself. Pat. Say it with me. You can say your own name. Pat, Pat, you are anxious and troubled about many things. Martha says, no, wait. That's not true. Who told you? Was it Mary? I may be anxious about a few things, Lord, but not many. Why pick on me? Lazarus and Mary have problems of their own, too. No one likes to be reminded that they have problems, and especially when they have been working so hard to hide it. Jesus' next words, "One thing is necessary." Now, I can imagine Martha saying, "What is it? I'll go get it." Martha was doing her very best to honor the Lord by her response to his presence. She shows love to him by serving him. What was wrong with Martha's choice? The reality is that Martha was doing the correct prescribed thing to do in that culture in Israel at that time. Hospitality is a huge concept. It was a social and religious duty to provide hospitality. It was what you do for guests. Remember Luke's account of visiting the home of Simon? Jesus says to Simon, "You didn't provide water for my feet. You didn't give me a kiss of welcome. You didn't anoint my head with oil, but this woman did all that." Those were the things that were expected and required when a guest came to your home. So Martha was doing what was right, what was expected by custom and ritual, both socially and religiously. Mary was the one breaking the rules. And yet Jesus' next words are, "Mary has chosen the better part. It won't be taken away from her." What is he saying? Martha, Martha, you are so busy looking after me, so busy serving me, so concerned that the right things be done that you are missing the chance to be with me. You are missing the necessary thing, the thing that Mary has chosen and the thing that I will not take away from her. You know, sometimes the best way to treat a guest is not by doing something special for them, but by spending as much time with them as possible. Barbara Bush said once at a Wellesley College commencement, as important as your obligation as a doctor, a lawyer, or a business leader may be, your human connections with your spouse, your children, and your friends are the most important investment you will ever make. At the end of your life, you will never regret not having passed one more test, not winning one more verdict, or not closing one more deal, but you will regret time not spent with your spouse, your children, your friends. I know that in many homes, when company comes after the meal, the dishes and all the cleaning is set aside, and everyone moves to the living room, out of sight of all that work that needs doing, so they can enjoy some time together without distraction. Some of us are more like Martha. Some of us are more like Mary. But there is in all of us a built-in need to combine the two within us. For without sitting and listening to God, our work for God will lead us to anxiety and anger and resentment and worry. And without doing the work that God calls us to do, our faith is empty. Graham Hutchins, a Methodist minister, once said, there is a need occasionally to get the visionaries in the kitchen and the kitchenaries in the vision. So ultimately, this gospel story has nothing to do with choosing between two different types of being or between two kinds of response to Christ. It has everything to do with choosing to be who we are fully and completely in the moment. It's about accepting life with all its gifts and graces, about not making comparisons and not using the if-only lie as an escape or an excuse. Personally, I think an ideal ending to this gospel story, if I were writing it instead of Luke, would be to have the two sisters trade places after dinner. Mary washes up while Martha gets to sit at the Lord's feet. It's fair. It's reasonable, and most of us know that it's highly unlikely. I know, at least when it came to me and my sister. The one who served at lunch was usually not only the one who cleaned up, but the one who served at dinner as well. And I know that because it was very often me, the Martha. See, Martha wanted to make sure that Jesus did not leave her home hungry. And Jesus was not anti-food. Jesus loved to eat with his friend. He merely coveted Martha's concern about food for the soul as well as food for the body. In the other story about Mary and Martha, when Lazarus died, John reports that it was Mary who stayed at home and Martha who went out to meet with Jesus, ended up in quite a theological conversation with him. It's not about holding one of these sisters up against the other. It's not about honoring one way of being as being better than the other, but rather it's about inviting us to embody both, to be in balance. There's a chapel somewhere in Wisconsin that has a stained glass window over the entrance, showing the figure of Jesus with open arms. Some, when they see it for the first time, remark how meaningful he seems to be inviting us in to worship. That's true, the pastor says. He is indeed inviting us in to worship. When the service is over and the same person goes out the door, they look up at the window again. There is the figure of Jesus with the same open, inviting arms. Look, they say, now he seems to be inviting us out. Right, the pastor replies. The Jesus who invites you into worship now invites you out into the world to serve other people in his name. Balance between being and doing.